Hello and welcome to episode 44 of the 1001 Movies podcast, based on the book 1001 Movies You Must See Before You Die. This week, we'll be talking about Stanley Kubrick's 1971 futuristic crime drama, A Clockwork Orange.
Choice. The boy has no real choice, has he? Self-interest. The fear of physical pain drove him to that grotesque act of self-abasement. Its insincerity was clearly to be seen. He ceases to be a wrongdoer. He ceases also to be a creature capable of moral choice.
Padre, these are subtleties. We're not concerned with motives, with a higher ethics. We are concerned only with cutting down crime. With relieving the ghastly congestion in our prisons. He will be your true Christian, ready to turn the other cheek, ready to be crucified rather than crucify, sick to the very heart at the thought even of killing a fly. Reclamation, joy before the angels of God. The point is that it works.
Before I talk about the film, I should mention that this is the final episode of the second season of the podcast, and if you've been enjoying it, I'd like to take the time to modestly ask you to go onto iTunes and give us a good rating. The more positive feedback, the more likely the podcast will reach new listeners. If you're one of the people who have left feedback as of this recording, I thank you for it, and hope you'll continue listening. Now, on to the film. Stanley Kubrick is pretty much considered one of the best American filmmakers, and his distinct style is even recognizable to those who aren't his biggest fans. Ironically, he directed only 13 feature films in his lifetime between 1953 and 1999, and 9 of these films are featured in 1001 Movies You Must See Before You Die. A Clockwork Orange is his 9th film, and was made at the pinnacle of his career, fresh off of 1968's 2001 A Space Odyssey. Based on the book of the same name, it was one of 5 novels written by Anthony Burgess in 1961 when he believed he was dying of a brain tumor. The book is in no way autobiographical, but it did include one violent incident from Burgess's own tragic past. In 1944, 4 GI deserters beat and robbed his wife in London. He intended for A Clockwork Orange to be a parable about the state's methodology of destroying free will, a message that was carried over to the film, but with more violence and nudity than Burgess may have expected. Stanley Kubrick had read the book, but initially thought it was unfilmable. After the success of 2001, he was inspired to finally begin working on his yet unrealized pet project, an epic biopic about Napoleon Bonaparte, starring none other than Jack Nicholson in the lead role. However, similar projects by other filmmakers were doomed to failure, and realizing that no one would ever give him the cash to realize his dream project, Kubrick turned his attention to something more realistic. Successful films like Easy Rider and The Graduate reflected audiences' taste for movies about youth culture, and Kubrick realized that this may be the time to make A Clockwork Orange, a cautionary tale about young Alex, a street thug and common criminal who finds himself imprisoned after the accidental killing of one of his victims. Alex volunteers for the Ludovico treatment, which cures his cravings for sex and violence by striking him sick every time he thinks of them. Released from prison, Alex soon finds himself at the mercy of those he wronged earlier before trying to commit suicide by jumping out of a window. Terrified of the publicity that will follow, the state deprograms him back to his old ways, and as the film closes with the sexual imagery blooming from Alex's mind, he declares, "I was cured, all right." The language used by Alex and his friends in the book was one of the key elements that turned Kubrick off to the book, but Burgess's script retained the language, which he called nadstat, teen slang with Russian influences. Kubrick was also inspired by pop art of the 1960s, and he and his set designer John Barry used elements such as nude female mannequins as furniture and minimalist dwellings. He also retained Walter Carlos to develop the music, covers from classical works like Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, Rossini's William Tell Overture, and Purcell's Music for the Funeral of Queen Mary. Classical music purists had always loathed Carlos for what they thought were bastardizations of classical pieces using his Moog synthesizer, an instrument he helped to develop. Kubrick also used the music of a trio of American New Age musicians, Sun Forest, including their charming little ditty, "I Want to Marry a Lighthouse Keeper," as well as their instrumental Overture to the Sun in the film. To this day, the unique set design and music are probably some of the most memorable elements of A Clockwork Orange. To others, however, the film's violence eclipsed everything else. The brutal sequence in which Alex rapes a young woman while cheerfully crooning Singing in the Rain remains the film's most memorable scene, and allegedly inspired gangs of young men to commit copycat crimes in the years following the movie's release, although some of these stories remain simply the stuff of urban legend. In 1968, Kubrick had seen a film called If, a bizarre little English film directed by Lindsay Anderson about a schoolboy who takes revenge on the traditionalism and snobbery of his public school by perching himself atop the roof with a machine gun and bumping off the school authorities. Kubrick admired Malcolm McDowell in the lead role and felt that he possessed the correct amount of charm as well as, just underneath the surface, creepiness to pull off the role of Alex. It also didn't hurt that McDowell could pull off male frontal nudity, and he wasn't the only actor whose bodily talents were considered. Kubrick's search for the perfect female bodies for his films rivaled Alfred Hitchcock's obsessions with many of his female stars, and Kubrick was rumored to spend hours poring over models' portfolios. The efforts may have paid off. By the end of post-production, there were no less than 9 actresses who appeared topless in one form or another in A Clockwork Orange. Stories abound of Kubrick's manipulation of his actors on the set, and Malcolm McDowell was no exception. Hearing that McDowell was afraid of reptiles, he instantly rented a large python for Alex to share his bed with. McDowell suffered physically on set as well, later claiming that the mechanisms used to clamp his eyes open during the Ludovico treatment scratched his left cornea, resulting in intense pain. His complaints fell on deaf ears, and Kubrick simply said, "Let's go on with the scene, I'll favor your other eye." McDowell also had his ribs cracked in the scene in which he's beat up on stage, which resulted in him being in complete agony during the famous Singing in the Rain rape scene. Stories of his almost drowning while submerged in a horse trough full of dirty water are apparently untrue. McDowell was given an underwater breathing apparatus to use during the length of the 2-minute shot. Kubrick may have been a manipulator and a misogynist, but he was certainly an economist. With a budget of about $2 million, he was forced to film everything on location, and as it turned out, early 70s London became the perfect concrete jungle to film the story. John Barry only built 4 sets: the Korova Milk Bar, the prison admission room, the entrance hall of the home which falls prey to Alex's home invasion, and the home's bathroom, seen briefly as Alex takes a post-treatment bath while humming Singing in the Rain. A scene in a bathroom is allegedly a Kubrick trademark used in all, if not most, of his movies. A Clockwork Orange was widely hailed as the next Kubrick masterpiece upon its release, although it did have its detractors. Roger Ebert, for instance, wrote, "Stanley Kubrick's A Clockwork Orange is an ideological mess, a paranoid right-wing fantasy masquerading as an Orwellian warning. It pretends to oppose the police state and forced mind control, but all it really does is celebrate the nastiness of its hero, Alex." The Academy of Motion Pictures Arts and Sciences felt a bit differently, and it earned 4 Oscar nominations. Best Picture, Best Director, Best Adapted Screenplay, and Best Film Editing, although all 4 awards went to other nominees. Kubrick was disturbed by the violence supposedly caused by the film in the United Kingdom and ordered all prints of the film to be pulled from the country. The self-imposed ban was enforced until after his death in 2000, during which time fans of the film would allegedly have to order VHS or DVD copies from France. It remains one of the most iconic movies of all time, and even those who haven't seen it can recognize the imagery from everything from The Simpsons to current-day political thrillers. Kubrick, of course, would go on to make other movies like Barry Lyndon, The Shining, and Full Metal Jacket, all of which are stories for another time. What did I think of A Clockwork Orange? I really like Stanley Kubrick, but this one isn't at the top of the list of his films for me. This isn't because of the violence. Indeed, the story in no way glorifies the rape and beatings that occur in the film's first act, but rather shows us that these young thugs are enjoying and celebrating the sex and violence they impose on others. The irony, of course, is that by the end of the movie, young Alex is stripped of all free will and goes from being the victimizer to the victim. This is all slathered into the script with the broad stroke of a sledgehammer during the scene in which Alex's cure is exhibited on stage to a gathering of politicians, during which the angry prison chaplain denounces his new condition. What follows is a series of events in the film's third act that simply mirror those in the first act, with poor Alex tormented by his victims from his former life. The story is stretched out over 2 hours and 15 minutes and may try the patience of some viewers. The great aspects of A Clockwork Orange, I think, lie not in the story, but in the fact that this film is in itself a work of art. I've already talked about the set design and the music, but Kubrick's precise sense of framing and his use of iconography make this a rich experience, as is the case with most of Kubrick's films. I realize that this sounds like the film is nothing more than a bit of eye candy, but that's not really what I mean. If it is indeed eye candy, then it's a sophisticated piece of dark chocolate. At almost 45 years old, the film still stands tall with its message about the futile efforts of politicians to control the masses, and its timeless feel that seems to be neither in the present nor a dystopian future. It is a piece that is obviously discussed endlessly by self-titled film scholars in wine bars and coffee houses, but that doesn't change the fact that it's a masterpiece. That's all I have to say about A Clockwork Orange, and this marks the end of the second season of the 1001 Movies podcast. I will be back, probably sooner than later this time, I promise, and when season 3 begins, I'll be here to talk about The Golden Coach, Jean Renoir's 1953 comedic drama. In the meantime, feel free to email me any questions or comments at 1001moviespodcast@gmail.com. Follow me on Twitter at 1001moviespc, and look for the podcast's Facebook page. Until next time, happy viewing.
I've a smile on my face. I walk down the lane with a happy refrain, just singing in the rain, dancing in the rain.